Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. The former U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin has blasted President Biden, saying we surely don't need more spending now. In fact, he said President Biden's Build Back Better plan is not deficit neutral. In fact, President Biden and his associates have said that this new Build Back Better plan is not going to increase the U.S. federal deficit because it's going to be financed by new income. And what the U.S. Treasury Secretary is saying is, well, that's not quite true. It's not deficit neutral. Let's start by taking a look at an important segment featuring the U.S. Treasury Secretary, where he highlights that President Biden's plan is not deficit neutral. Let's roll the tape and see what the U.S. Treasury Secretary had to say.
We didn't need the last $2 trillion, and we surely don't need more spending now. And when people say, oh, it's deficit neutral, it's not deficit neutral. That's silly government math over a 10-year period. The debt would go way up. I mean, just to put this in perspective, we had $22 trillion of debt and $20 trillion of GDP pre-COVID. We're now at $29.5 trillion of debt, on our way to 31 or 32, and everything's funded out.
The prior bills in 2020 passed unanimously. They were bipartisan bills to mitigate the pandemic crisis and at least the temporary economic shutdown. We didn't have to use reconciliation. There was no bitterness. It wasn't that easy. You were one of the principal negotiators of those bills. I mean, isn't that a tip-off? Even going back to last spring, the $2 trillion bill, and certainly now this bill that we want to kill, if you can't get it done in a bipartisan way, it probably is not worth doing.
Larry, I agree with you completely. And we never even considered using reconciliation for these emergency spending programs. I mean, as you know, we used reconciliation for the Tax Act. And, you know, taxes can go up, taxes can go down, but reconciliation was not intended to replace a mechanism for government spending. And as you remember, Speaker Pelosi and I negotiated a 2-year caps deal for government spending. And, you know, in those times, we were arguing about 10 billion or 15 billion difference, not a trillion here, a trillion there.
Yes. Let me turn to parts of this gigantic bill. I mean, it looks like the bill is dead, but it's never fully dead. And again, I give lots of praise to Joe Manchin for his courage as a Democrat, leading Democrat, to stop this thing.
In fact, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary spoke with Fox Business Larry Kudlow, and he spoke about the state of the economy and what should be done moving forward as the United States faces more debt and inflation. In fact, Kudlow began by noting that Save America, Kill the Bill was going to be one of his focuses, because he said the proposed Build Back Better plan being pushed by the Biden administration was not a good idea. And this is what Stephen Mnuchin said. We've spent $4 trillion, and he was referring to the stimulus packages passed in 2020 during the Trump administration. And he said, and the first two bills we passed, 96 for, 0 against, and 100 for, 0 against, overwhelming support. And he said, and I think had we not done that, we would have had a global depression. Mnuchin continued, but we should have stopped there. And he was talking about the Democrats' COVID-19 relief bill. And he said, we don't need the last $2 trillion, and we surely don't need more spending now. Let's roll the tape and check out another important segment featuring the former U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. Let's watch.
Debating, you know, our mantra in the show has been save America, kill the bill. And so forth and so on. Joe Manchin's been a hero on this. But if you step back for a second, did we or do we really need this Build Back Better? You know, the CBO scored it as $5 trillion with $3 trillion in debt. Do we really need this bill? And in fact, Steve, I just want to add one more. Did we really need the emergency relief bill last March and April? That was $2 trillion. Was all this stuff necessary?
Larry, as you know, we spent $4 trillion. In the first two bills, we passed 96 to 0 and 100 to 0. Overwhelming support. And I think had we not done that, we would have had a global depression. But we should have stopped there. We didn't need the last $2 trillion, and we surely don't need more spending now. And when people say, oh, it's deficit neutral, it's not deficit neutral. That's silly government math over a 10-year period. The debt would go way up. I mean, just to put this in perspective, we had $22 trillion of debt and $20 trillion of GDP pre-COVID. We're now at $29.5 trillion of debt, on our way to 31 or 32, and everything's funded out.
Now, as you can see, Stephen Mnuchin goes on to blast the Build Back Better Act, saying, when people say, oh, it's deficit neutral, it's not deficit neutral. That's silly government math over a 10-year period. The debt would go way, way up. In fact, Kudlow then asked US Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin for his views on what will happen with inflation, and he called this a government spending and Federal Reserve money creation issue. Mnuchin said, there's no question we have inflation and we are going to continue to have inflation. In fact, Mnuchin continued by saying, I think the Fed was slow. And I understand why they were slow, because they wanted to be careful. But the minutes came out today. And he said, clearly the Fed is going to raise rates. The Fed is going to normalize the portfolio. It's just a matter of time as to how quick they are and how fast they do it. And he went on to say, I think we're going to slow down inflation, but we definitely have to raise interest rates along the way. And he said he felt the Fed was slow to react because Chairman Jerome Powell was concerned about reacting too quickly. Mnuchin said, now I think they get it. I think over the next year, you're going to see the Fed normalize rates and normalize the portfolio. The numbers overwhelmingly show that we have real ongoing inflation. Let's roll the tape and check out another important segment featuring important comments from the US Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin. Let's watch.
Yes, and actually, I know you always say to me that I'm not as worried about the debt as you are, but actually I'm catching up to you on this debt question because it's so much, the numbers have gotten so big. And I just want to add to that, the inflation issue, which is principally a government spending and Fed money creation issue. I mean, Steve, if we didn't have these big bills, maybe the inflation rate would be a whole lot lower today.
Larry, I'm glad you're catching up to me on this issue. And there's no question we have inflation. We're going to continue to have inflation. I think the Fed was slow, and I understand why they were slow, because they wanted to be careful, given none of these models really can predict things. But now I think you've seen them. The minutes came out today. Clearly, the Fed is going to raise rates. The Fed is going to normalize the portfolio. It's just how quick or how fast they do it. And look, I think 18 months from now we'll be sitting with 3% 10-year treasuries. So I think we're going to slow down the inflation, but we definitely have to raise interest rates along the way.
Yeah, you think the Fed's behind the 8 ball?
I think they are. I think they've been slow to react, but I think Chair Powell, was concerned about reacting too quickly. But now I think they get it. So I think over the next year, you're going to see the Fed normalize rates and normalize the portfolio. The Fed has always been very concerned about inflation, and the numbers now overwhelmingly show we have real ongoing inflation. This just isn't a transition issue.
So, folks, that's where we stand. Let me know in the comment section below whether you agree or disagree with Stephen Mnuchin's comments. Remember, this is the former U.S. Treasury Secretary under former President Trump, and he's clearly not happy with what the Biden administration is doing. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with Mnuchin's comments below. Please click like, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda. This right here is a little bit of information about me. You'll learn more about who I am, what my journey has been like, and why you should listen to me. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.